So just to say good afternoon, my name's Chris Duffin, and I'm the current president of the British Society for the History of Pharmacy. We're a group of people from a wide range of backgrounds who share an interest in the history of pharmacy, and further details about our group, the activities we run, and our publication, The Pharmaceutical Historian, not to be missed, I must say, can be found on our website. So just if you're joining, can I just encourage you please to ensure that video and microphone are both switched off for the duration of the talks. And if you need to adjust the volume on your screens and so on, then please do so that you can hear everybody. Note also that closed captioning is taking place at the bottom of the screen. So if you do find it difficult to hear, you should at least be able to have some text as backup. Now, I'd like to hand over now to Roy Alcorn, who's the Honorary Secretary of the Society, and he's going to share some recent news with us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. It's sad news, as many of you will know. You'll be seeing these pictures. Well, the members and committee of the British Society for the History of Pharmacy were really deeply shocked to learn of the death of Peter Homan last weekend. He was a loyal supporter of our work, and he will be missed by all of us in so many ways. He became BSHP's full-time honorary secretary around 1998, when the Society lost the services of a paid secretary who was based at the Edinburgh office of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. He grew into the role with his usual professionalism and did such a good job that he actually held the position for at least 20 years. In 2018, we on the committee proposed that he be elected as president at long last, and the only way of achieving this transition was for myself to take over the role of honorary secretary. It was Peter's, to his eternal credit, that he had the Society's affairs so well organised that the handover was seamless. He was so very proud of being president and held this well-deserved position for 2.5 years until October 2020. And you'll see there in the middle picture of him proudly with his presidential badge. Before all this, he was employed by Boots for his whole working life and managed several of their pharmacies. His anecdotes about his time, for example, in Boots Piccadilly were legendary. Many of you will remember those. He qualified as a pharmacist and an apothecary. Indeed, his invaluable support for the Society of Apothecaries must be mentioned at this point. I first met him when I joined the staff of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society in the 1990s, then based in Lambeth. He was a part-time volunteer in their museum, and he loved that role. His knowledge about pharmacy, past and present, came to the fore, and this blossomed there over a 25-year period. His work meant so much to them and was so important for him personally. He researched, gave talks and demonstrations to visitors to the museum, wrote information sheets and articles, even co-authored some textbooks. He revelled in sharing his knowledge of the subject. As you'll see on the left of that picture, our society awarded him our own Leslie Matthews Medal in 2015 at the annual conference in Sunderland. This medal honours the memory of Mr. Leslie G. Matthews, who was a barrister, notable pharmacist and scholar, and it's awarded for original and scholarly work on the history of British pharmacy, and is an evaluation based on competence of research, skill in interpretation, and ability in presentation. Peter did all these and more in abundance, and this was awarded in recognition of significant achievements that he made with historical research. Peter, as many of you know, was the ultimate people person, and he loved all forms of personal interaction. Those whose lives were touched by him know exactly what I mean. Some of the emails I've received this week about him sum all this up. For example, a few quotes: an inspirational figure, a much loved and dear friend, a lovely gentleman, kind, knowledgeable, enthusiastic, a huge loss to pharmacy history, a wonderful mentor. His contributions were always much appreciated. He gave a great service commitment to BSHP. He will be much missed by all of us and long remembered. And indeed, the following lines came from a member of his family. Quote, Peter always looked forward to the annual conference and took it as an opportunity to catch up with old friends and also to explore a new part of the country. He's thanking all of us for our kind thoughts of mentioning Peter today. And the family want to be let it known that they're very grateful for members' thoughts and messages of condolence. And clearly that's what I'm now doing. They continued, we all know how big a part of Peter's life your society was and how much his friends and colleagues meant to him. He was also extremely proud of his presidency. Anyway, we're happy to have shared those words with you now. His beloved wife of many years, Christine, died some time ago now. They shared everything, and especially in the context here, the administration of our annual conference. He was obviously devastated at losing her, but he coped on his own by involving himself in his interests, his friends and colleagues, and his family. Indeed, his prescription for life was to live it to the full, which he dispensed with infectious enthusiasm. Those who know him will remember his wicked and impish sense of humour. For example, this picture here shows him at our summer visit to John Bell and Croydon in London in 2017. He soon spotted this gold-plated mobility scooter and leapt onto it, much to the amusement of those attending the visit and the staff of this famous London pharmacy. Many will have been on the receiving end of his love of jokes and what might be called, I would call, earthy attachments to various emails. So yes, we're mourning the loss of Peter this weekend, but we also celebrate his life and the achievements that he made. We're dedicating this conference to his memory. He would have been thrilled at the popularity of this online version of our annual conference. Indeed, I could have spent the whole conference weekend sort of celebrating and remembering all his achievements, but I hope this has given you a flavour of the man that we all knew and loved. Those of you who've had any form of contact with him will have some wonderful memories to fall back upon. I do feel blessed to have known him and to have worked with him. It's with a sense of real thankfulness that I say that. May God bless him and may he rest in peace. We sent our sincere condolences to his family on behalf of everyone connected with the Society. Thank you for listening to this short tribute to a great friend and colleague who will be sorely missed. And so back to Chris, our president, who is hosting today's meeting. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
I beg your pardon. Thank you, Roy. In normal times, we hold a residential weekend History of Pharmacy conference somewhere in the UK, fairly close in date to Easter. But these, of course, aren't normal times. And so through the hard work of Bryony Hudson, we've opened up our conference to an online audience. And we're therefore very pleased to welcome you, both members and non-members alike, to this year's programme, held over 3 days from 4 p.m. for a couple of hours each day, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. We'd especially like to welcome overseas participants and those of you who have joined us from different time zones. We hope you can catch up on your sleep when the time comes. We hope you find the programme of members' talks both stimulating and informative. Many of you are joining us from Eventbrite invitations, but I should mention that live streaming is also taking place on the BSHP YouTube channel. And there you can also find a short video looking behind the scenes at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society Museum. Could I repeat my request, please, for everybody to switch off both video and microphone for the duration of the talks? You're welcome to use the chat function, and I'll try and present any questions to each speaker that might arise from their talks. If you're watching the live stream on YouTube, there is also a chat function available there, which we'll try and keep an eye on. And please note that closed captioning is available should you require it. So without any further ado, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Emily Betz. The BSHP provides a bursary named in honour of Juanita Burnby, a BSHP member now deceased and a pharmacy history researcher of considerable merit. In her honour, this bursary is awarded on an annual basis. Further details of the award and an application form can be found on the BSHP website. Emily from the School of History at St Andrews University is the winner of the 2021 Burnby Award and will speak to us about Francis Bernard, 1628 to 1698, a 17th century apothecary and physician. Welcome to Emily.
Hi, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. I would especially like to thank Janet Payne, Archivist at the Society of Apothecaries, Claire Button, Archivist at Barts, and Phyllis Lancashire, Assistant Archivist at the Royal College of Physicians, for their help during this time when archives are closed. And I am, of course, much indebted to Juanita Burnby's insights into the English apothecary of the 17th century for this talk. Let me just get this up here. In the 1690s, the Royal College of Physicians and the Society of Apothecaries were in the middle of a decades-long dispute concerning the opening of a dispensary for free medical advice and low-cost medications for the poor. The dispensary would be an asset to the physicians who had proposed it, but was a concern for the apothecaries who worried that the doctors were encroaching on their traditional domain of selling medicinal goods. It was in the thick of this dispute that the College of Physicians found out their secrets concerning the dispensary scheme were being leaked. Ideas for a dispensary project hailed back as early as 1675, when physicians first suggested it as a way to not only give back to the community, but also as a way to combat the reputation of the college as elitist and out of touch with the common man. This reputation had followed the college with particular doggedness since the mid-1660s, when the vast majority of physicians had followed their wealthy clientele out of London during the devastating plague of 1665, leaving the infected to be treated by other medical practitioners, especially the apothecaries. This service to the capital had raised the esteem of the apothecaries in the public eye, but was injurious to the physicians who were viewed as having abandoned the sick. Thus, the latter were eager to push the dispensary agenda. The apothecaries, on the other hand, were not as willing to contribute to the dispensary project as they felt that it would mean an infringement on how they conducted their business and priced their medicines. With the pushback from the apothecaries, the dispensary scheme was delayed in the 1670s and lay dormant for years. However, in the 1690s, tensions once again escalated about the project, and this time it became apparent that someone within the College of Physicians was leaking inside information to the Society of Apothecaries. The college ordered discretion among its members, but some refused to be silent. Somehow, the apothecaries had procured a handwritten list naming the physicians who were in favor of the new dispensary, a list that the apothecaries could then use to blacklist said physicians to their clientele. If there was ever any secret as to who had leaked insider information, the mystery was solved when a mouthpiece for the apothecaries named his source as Francis Bernard. Bernard was a newly minted fellow of the College of Physicians, but he had been trained and worked as an apothecary since 1645. His long career spans almost the entirety of the second half of the 17th century, and in his dual roles of apothecary and physician, he became a well-respected, not to mention well-remunerated, medical practitioner. In this paper, I would like to use Bernard as a case study to explore the expanding role of apothecaries in the medical landscape. To do so, I will explore two pivotal moments in his career: his service during the Great Plague of 1665, and his actions and allegiances during the dispensary disputes of the late 1680s and 1690s. The two episodes will illustrate not only the expansion of responsibilities and power of the apothecaries, but will also highlight the ubiquity of social connections between all levels of medical workers during this time. When Francis Bernard was apprenticed to the London apothecary John Lorimer in 1645 at the age of 17, the work of an apothecary was much more constrained than it would be at the end of his life in 1698. Historically, the apothecaries worked as shopkeepers and concoctors of prescriptions passed on to them by physicians. When they desired to create their own company and separate from the Grocers Guild of London, the College of Physicians was there to lend its support, with the understanding that the apothecaries would remain a helpful and subservient class of practitioners, a so-called mechanical tribe of workers who stayed well within their circumscribed role. This was, of course, not always the case, particularly in provincial towns where a lack of practitioners encouraged an overlap in medical duties. However, in the capital, where the College of Physicians was capable of fining and remanding unlicensed practitioners who trespassed on their domain, this bifurcated landscape was generally upheld until the 1660s. By that point in time, Bernard had gained his freedom of the Society of Apothecaries and had been appointed seemingly at the behest of King Charles II as apothecary to St. Bartholomew's Hospital in 1661. 4 years into his tenure at the hospital, disaster struck in the form of the last great outbreak of bubonic plague in England. As the spring rolled into the summer in 1665, what had at first seemed like an isolated outbreak of disease spread uncontrolled through the city. As usual in cases of plague, those who could leave the city did so, including the vast majority of physicians who followed their wealthy patients to the safer air of the countryside. All but 24 physicians fled the city, leaving the care of sick Londoners to other medical practitioners, particularly the apothecaries. The staff of St. Bartholomew's Hospital was no exception. The 2 regular physicians, Doctors Micklethwaite and Turn, left the city, and Francis Bernard and several surgeons stayed behind to tend the patients. When it became clear that Turn and Micklethwaite would not be returning to their posts until the epidemic ceased, their salaries were suspended, and the governors of the hospital agreed that Bernard should be allowed not only to create medicines, but also to diagnose and prescribe for the ill in place of the physicians. Bernard acted commendably, and as a reward for risking his life, was given £25 by the hospital, a quite substantial fee equal to an entire year's pay of outpatient treatment. Bernard's story was similar to many of the apothecaries who served the public during that grim year. Decades later, the apothecaries were still being lauded for their efforts to aid the sick, much to the detriment of the physicians' reputations. Although the physicians, in an effort to quell criticism, argued that they had only left London to follow their patients, and anyway, the apothecaries were more likely to harm the sick than cure them on their own, their portrayal of events convinced very few. Apothecaries capitalized on this public relations triumph for the rest of the century, while physicians were left to brood over their negative press. What hurt the physicians even more than this bad publicity was the expansion of apothecaries into the field of practice. Having served the sick during the plague without recourse to the physicians, the apothecaries argued that they should be allowed to continue to give medical advice to those who sought their help. The College of Physicians had far too few members to service all of sick London's needs, and the apothecaries had shown themselves willing to take on the task. Bernard himself was able to capitalize on his service at the hospital and eventually was awarded his MD by Archbishop Sancroft in 1678, which he incorporated at Cambridge that same year. As the trade of apothecaries encroached further into the realm of the physician, tensions abounded at the institutional level between the society and college. One of the most virulent of these disputes came in the form of the dispensary proposed by the physicians, as mentioned at the beginning of this talk. Originally proposed to include the apothecaries, the physicians suggested that the Society of Apothecaries provide medicines at or below cost for the poor in 1675. Although there were several discussions between the 2 institutions, the dispensary talks stalled in the end. These talks were reinitiated again throughout the 1680s, and in 1687, the physicians voted to give advice gratis to the certified poor of London. Nothing was said of a dispensary for medicines at this time. It was not until 1695 that the project really got underway, however. The impetus necessary for the dispensary was ironically provided in part by the apothecaries themselves. Although the City of London was in desperate need of ways to care for the sick poor and applied to the College of Physicians for help in treating those who could not afford medical care, it was not until the college heard derogatory remarks made about it by the apothecaries that the the dispensary project was formally revived. It seems that when defending a new bill on behalf of the apothecaries before Parliament, their counsel incidentally insulted the physicians. The so-called Apothecaries Bill was proposed to excuse the apothecaries from jury duty and other mandatory parish and ward services. When explaining why it was necessary to relieve them of these extra duties, their counsel explained that the apothecaries, quote, took care of all the sick poor and servants in and about London, who must otherwise perish without their assistance. For the doctors would not come to the poor without fees, nor to the rich if at dinner or in bed, whilst they came at all times and give their advice and physic to the poor for nothing. The bill was passed, but the damage done in its defense was viewed as an irredeemable affront. When the insulting words were rehearsed at the College of Physicians, they inflamed enough doctors to revitalize the dispensary project. This time around, however, the project was conceived not only with the good of the poor in mind, but also with a mind to attack the prerogative of the apothecaries. By deciding to give not only free medical advice, but also to provide the poor with medications without resort to the apothecaries, the College of Physicians' aim was to dispose of the apothecaries' role in the project altogether. Some in the college felt that this was only right, considering the apothecaries often took on the role of the physician in diagnosing and prescribing to the ill. Although not a unanimous decision, there were enough supporters to get the physicians' venture rolling. And by spring 1698, a dispensary was opened by the physicians in Warwick Lane. Although the dispensary was voted into existence, it remained a topic of much frustration both without and within the college. We've already seen that Bernard was engaged in a bit of espionage by providing the Society of Apothecaries with the names of the physicians who subscribed to the dispensary fund. As one of the leading apothecary physicians within the college, so called for the defense of the apothecaries' interests, Bernard also employed other methods to try to stop the project. For example, during the meeting called to vote on the dispensary in November 1696, Bernard, together with some of the leading society physicians of the day, led a walkout of 20-odd anti-dispensarian members of the college, despite being commanded to stay by the president. That was not the only way Bernard showed his support for the apothecaries. Financially, Bernard continued to give to the society, even though he had not been a member since 1687. His affection remained for his former society, however, as he gave the quite significant sum of £20 to the apothecaries in 1689 and again in 1694. He also voted with his money when the College of Physicians asked for its members to give £50 bonds in support of the college leaders in 1695. Bernard flatly refused. Moreover, Bernard declined to stop associating with practitioners beyond the walls of the college, even those whom the institution deemed unsuitable. When tensions were at their highest between the institutions in 1696, the college had prohibited its members from any familiar correspondence with practitioners that it deemed to have broken the statutes set out by the physicians. Bernard, however, continued to support apothecaries, physicians, and empirics that he felt were ill-treated by the College of Physicians. He testified for the empiric Johannes Groeneveld in the latter half of the 1690s when he was accused of malpractice by the college. He also lent his support to John Badger, a doctor who was promised membership in the college only to be later denied entry. Badger was also an author of many of the anti-dispensary pamphlets produced in the 1680s and 1690s, and it was into his hands that Bernard entrusted the college's new statutes and the subversive physicians' name list. Bernard's vociferous opposition to the dispensary project and his continued allegiance to the apothecaries was conveyed to the public in the immensely popular poem by fellow physician Samuel Garth, entitled The Dispensary, 1699. In this mock heroic poem, Bernard was unflatteringly characterized as horoscope, situated in his apothecary shop and feigning at the idea of losing profits to the physicians. Garth's poem was an instant success, and for the time being, it settled the dispensary debate in the public mind on the side of the physicians. The physicians were portrayed as opening the dispensary for the greater good, while the scheming, greedy apothecaries and their errant physician allies fought to prevent the loss of their own profits. Ultimately, although Bernard threw his full weight against the project and continued to be a leading figure for the apothecary physicians within the college, the dispensary went forward, opening only a few months after his death in 1698. By 1705, much of the furor over the dispensary had died down, and for the next 20 years until its discontinuance in 1725, it functioned relatively quietly. So, what can we learn from Bernard's career in these 2 episodes about the changing role of apothecaries? I want to share 3 main takeaways. 1, the remit of the apothecaries grew rapidly in the second half of the 17th century. And despite the best efforts of the College of Physicians, the apothecary as a diagnostic practitioner became a firmly implanted idea in the public mind. Apothecaries took the opportunities that were afforded them by plague and politics to expand their practice beyond the shopkeeper's counter. At the beginning of the 17th century, their job responsibilities had mostly focused around their shops. But by the end of the century, while some still remained in their shops, the majority of the apothecary's duties lay in attending to the sick and doling out advice. After the plague of 1665 in particular, many apothecaries like Bernard felt that it was their right to practice medicine on minor ailments or for the poor that would not be able to afford to see a physician. Although alarming to the physicians, this did not stop the apothecaries. We know from legal cases and medical tracts that apothecaries continued to practice medicine even though they were warned against it numerous times by the College of Physicians. In fact, the practice had become so widespread that in a 1704 landmark case brought against an apothecary who gave medical advice, the case was awarded in his favor, signaling that apothecaries had a natural right to diagnose and prescribe just as physicians did. The second takeaway is that along with a growing professional description, the power of the apothecaries had grown enormously. From being considered lower status workmen without even their own company at the beginning of the century, they had grown rapidly in numbers and prestige, so that by the end of the century, they were thought worthy of positions of civic leadership. Even though Bernard and the apothecaries ultimately were not able to stop the plans for a physician dispensary, this episode shows the power of the apothecaries in being able to delay the plan for over 2 decades from its initial inception. They had grown influential enough to leverage their power into being excused from mandatory municipal duties, and they were confident enough to stand up to the College of Physicians. Finally, it should be emphasized that although the medical institutions of this time were divided on many issues, it did not mean that there was personal enmity between the different types of practitioners. Medical workers function in a world of institutional debate, but personal connection and cooperation. While historians like Hal Cook and Margaret Pelling have contributed greatly to our understanding of the divisions and strife between medical institutions of the early modern medical marketplace, it became clear while studying the career and social circles of Francis Bernard that it is also necessary to explore the conciliations of early modern medical practitioners. Like scholars such as Patrick Wallace and Jonathan Barry, I found much evidence to imply that cooperation and friendly relations were more prevalent than previously suggested in the historiography. Although the College of Physicians tried to limit physician interactions with irregular practitioners, they had little success. Bernard is only one example of a practitioner who not only retained his connections with the apothecaries, but also socialized frequently with society doctors and empirics. Other well-respected physicians also had amiable connections with a variety of practitioners. Hans Sloane, for example, financed the Society of Apothecaries' famous Chelsea Physic Garden in the early 18th century, and the wealthy Richard Mead often met with apothecaries in coffee houses to discuss medical queries. Moreover, the institutional disputes were largely relegated to the capital. The lack of medical professionals in the provinces meant that there were more than enough patients for everyone. Although Francis Bernard became a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, he by no means abandoned his interests or contacts in the field of apothecaries. The unique position that he held as both apothecary and doctor during the second half of the 17th century allows us invaluable insight into the increasing status of the apothecaries, particularly during the struggles of the 1680s and 1690s. I hope this paper has demonstrated some of the ways that the apothecaries used their changing position and responsibilities within the medical landscape. I hope it has also been a reminder that alongside the intra and interinstitutional fighting, there was also a world of cooperation between individual practitioners of both fields. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily, for your presentation, and also for your impeccable timekeeping, because you brought us more or less exactly back onto track after we had this additional little interlude. I don't have any questions in the chat box that I can see. Although there is a comment that it was a very fascinating talk, and thank you very much. The materials were most interesting and illuminating. And then oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. What archival materials were most illuminating and interesting to you when you were researching Bernard and the apothecaries? So what archival materials were?
Yeah, so I actually found his own writings really interesting. So there's a set of letters from him, and there was one describing how secretive and kind of not above board the leaders of the College of Physicians were. And I thought that's exactly, I mean, that really illustrates he wasn't shy about sharing his feelings. So I think letters about him, and then I also worked with a lot of just the different minutes of both the Society of Apothecaries and the College of Physicians.
Lovely, thank you. Clearly a time of great intrigue.
Yes.
Welcome back. Just to say, a reminder again to switch off microphones and videos. The BSHP also awards small research grants to support projects in the history of pharmacy. Further details and application forms can be found on the website, as I've said. In the 2019 to 2020 award was given to Soh Xi Ken of Sunderland University, and I hope he's there now so that we can welcome him today to speak to us on the topic, a holistic view of the evolution of pharmacy education, a case study of the University of Sunderland's School of Pharmacy. Over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Chris. Right, I'm just gonna share my screen. I think that's fine. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Soh Xi Ken, but people usually just call me Ken. I'm a level 3 pharmacy student studying in the University of Sunderland. And before I start this presentation, I would like to thank the BSHP for providing me a research grant into looking into a historical topic in pharmacy, Bryony and John for both providing me supervision and supporting me throughout the whole process, my parents, my mom specifically, for excuse me, providing me this excellent opportunity to study abroad, and my friend Jewel, who is always there to help inspire me to keep going. So this is a brief outline of what we're going to go through today. On the left, it's more of a older history type lecture, and then on the right, it's more contemporary and up-to-date research. So basically, my research is a bit of a historical retelling of the history of pharmacy education, with a focus on the history of University of Sunderland, which is officially 100 years old this September. And I know Norma previously talked about chemists and druggists, which is sort of the modern day equivalent of pharmacists. And I just call them C's and D's for short. And how do we used to train them? And before 1841, we trained them by apprenticeship. So parents usually paid masters to take in their child and train them to become chemists and druggists. And the quality of training just largely dependent on the master. But interestingly, in 1656, Borthwick and Kincaid had a stab at structured pharmaceutical education for apprentices. But other than that, there wasn't really any structured pharmaceutical education in the UK. And mainland European counterparts like Germany sort of led the charge in structured pharmaceutical education because they opened a chemistry lab for research and education in 1824. However, in 1841, the Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain, or PSGB, was formed by Jacob Bell, William Allen, and some London C&Ds. And so Jacob Bell really believes in the value of developing a structured pharmaceutical education to further progress the chemists and druggists at the time. So they set up to create the London School of Pharmacy, or in Bursary Square, or called the Square, and it survives today as UCL, or University College London School of Pharmacy. And now just a bit about the background of the opening of School of Pharmacy in Sunderland specifically. There were two associations specifically formed in 1869 and 1879, and these were all the local chemists and druggists' way to sort of have a stab at maybe creating a structured systemic education for pharmacy, versus like grammar schools that are cropping up in London for the qualifying exam. And in 1914, a part-time course was made and taught by Dunstan and Baker in Sunderland Technical College. And this was a part-time course, and they trained people in, helping them pass the minor exam. World War I also set the scene for the demobilized troops to be reintegrated to society, and pharmacy schools were part of that effort to accept students, and Sunderland was no different. The first cohort, which comprised of 25 out of 28 students, were ex-servicemen then. But at this point of the presentation, we need to talk about Hope Winch, who is the founder and the first head of school for Sunderland School of Pharmacy. She started her career as a dispenser in Newcastle and then promptly passed the Apothecary Hall exam, which can be thought as a pharmacy technician equivalent. And she worked for Wigan for a bit, which is a place between Liverpool and Manchester. And then she went to Bloomsbury Square to become a C&D. She was a silver medalist in botany. She was a Redwood Scholar. She was a Pereira medalist, and she was the 5th woman to win the Pereira medal since 1864, which is really impressive at that time. And all of these are pretty much just to say that she is an outstanding academic. She also passed the major exam in 1918. And so Hope Winch moved back to the Northeast, and she taught at Rutherford College for a bit, which now known as Northumbria Uni. But they only taught the part 1 of the minor exam, but you needed part 1 and part 2 to pass the minor exam. And so Hope Winch also did not like the premises of Rutherford College, but there was no documentation about why she didn't like that. I think potentially because Sunderland Technical College had that sort of previous connection with the local communities, and they have previous experience of delivering pharmaceutical education, like the part-time course I mentioned just now. And so Major Ernest Pact, on the behalf of the Pharmaceutical Society, inspected Rutherford College and approached Sunderland Technical College if they were willing to accommodate a pharmacy course. And so in 1921, Sunderland Technical College managed to provide a full-time pharmacy course of 9 months for the part 1 and part 2 minor exam. and this is quite good because at that time, not all pharmacy schools could provide both Part 1 and Part 2. A lot of it was just providing Part 1 instead of Part 2, but yeah. And Miss Winch taught all aspects of the course at that time, but student numbers really increased quickly and soon needed expansion. So dispensaries and 2 laboratories were built. Nixon and Penman were both hired to teach pharmaceutical chemistry, pharmaceutics, and forensic pharmacy. Miss Winch taught pharmacognosy and botany, and pharmacognosy is the study of plants or natural sources as a possible source of drug. This is a picture of the Galenical laboratory, and the Galenical means making drugs or specific concoctions, so somewhat similar to extemporaneous dispensing as we call it these days. And this is the Galen building where all the teachings used to take place, and it's really incredible how nothing's really changed across 100 years. And unfortunately, it's not, I don't think it's university property anymore. It's a bar now, and it's quite popular with students, but I've not been, but I think I'll have a look after lockdown lifts. So now I will talk a bit about Bachelor of Pharmacy. In 1926, Bloomsbury Square introduced an external B Pharm, and obviously at that time, degrees were quite rare, and the recognition to give them out was sort of a testament to how good your teaching should be. And Sunderland Technical College applied, but they needed a head of school. So Miss Winch obviously became the head of department in 1929. And Sunderland School really proved its place as a provider of high quality pharmaceutical education then. And unfortunately, she passed away because of a climbing accident at the young age of 50. This is a picture of Hope Winch. She's somewhat of an icon up here, and she was described as a kind, caring, generous soul, and in my opinion, extremely tenacious, considering women over 21 were only able to vote in 1928. So she was only able to vote the year before she became head of school, which was quite, you know, it spoke volumes about women's rights at that time and the whole suffragettes movement. And now I'll move on to talk about student-lecturer relations. It was described as really good. People knew lecturers intimately, and the relationships was really tight. And this was endangered when student numbers really climbed. They reinstated a two-year system, which still exists today, to sort of maintain that. And social functions existed back then, like Christmas dinners, hot pot suppers, sporting events, pantomimes, performances, walks and hikes in the Lake District, and dances, just to name a few. And this is a picture of a Christmas sketch in 1980, and this is a pantomime of Christmas pantomime, presumably of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, after Miss Winch's death, Jack Rawson succeeded her as head of school. 2 new laboratories were built, pharmacognosy and aseptics. And interestingly, the study of microbiology really started to boom. And this was 20 years after penicillin was discovered. Dr. Rawson also tried to establish another Bachelor of Pharmacy with Durham University this time, but after a private inspection, it was not to be. He later accepted a post as the curator of PSGB's museum and left Sunderland in 1949. This is a picture of him. And now Mr. Fred Oliver took over as head of school, and he appealed to get more space for the program in 1951 because the course was lengthened from 1 to 2 years by the PSGB, essentially doubling the space needed for the course. And he taught pharmacognosy until 1952, where Dr. Betty Jackson took over, and she was described as a really brilliant pharmacognosist. She was strict, but described as kind. She wrote, I think, 2 books on the subject as well. And in 1958, new premises were built in Chester Road, which is where the city campus now resides. But Mr. Oliver decided to, they had to decide if they wanted to move. And this is a picture of Mr. Fred Oliver. And Mr. Oliver decided to stay put instead of moving to Old Chester Road. And it unfortunately, that meant the end of the relationship between the chemistry and pharmacy department, because the chemistry department moved out and into Old Chester Road. But this also meant that Sunderland finally was officially recognized as a school of pharmacy in 1962. And there were sort of doubts if Mr. Oliver could fill out the entire Galen building, but Mr. Oliver was very successful, and the student numbers almost tripled, and numbers of lecturers increased tenfold, which was very promising at that time. People also describe Mr. Oliver as someone really approachable and friendly and inspiring. And now we'll move on to talk about work visits. So it used to just mainly consisted of trips to the manufacturers to help better understand how drugs were made, or to various hospital dispensaries, even ones down in London, which would be quite unfeasible today. But compared to today with the General Pharmaceutical Council, or the GPHC, they don't define how many hours or types of placements that are needed to provide it for students, but students are required to gain practical experience. So Sunderland thought of other ways to deliver these. So like IPA sessions, which is interprofessional education sessions, where students talk to dental, nursing, psychology, medicine students, or the PCPI sessions, which is the patient care or public involvement sessions, where instead of students going to on-site to see patients were hired to come to university to share their experiences and interact with students. But there were also like on-site placements, as usual. But they were short because placements aren't funded. This is because pharmacy isn't funded as a healthcare degree, it's funded as a science degree. So when we go on placements, they're paid by the university instead of the government. And now there are awards as well. So Hope Winch Memorial Scholarship is one of the scholarships that was set up after Miss Winch unfortunately died. And this was to award it for the best performing student in the penultimate year of study. So it used to be the person who's best performing in the second year, but in 1999, the UK pharmacy program was extended for 4 years with the Bologna Agreement to promote educational equivalence across Europe. So now the award is given to the best performing third year. So no pressure to any third years listening, myself included. And these are the pictures that shows all the winners of the award. I would like to point out 1953, Irving Johnston won the award, and in 1954, he won another Pereira Medal for the School of Pharmacy, which is very impressive. And this comes up to 2019. And another award that is dedicated to Hope Winch was the Hope Winch Benevolence Fund. And this is a hardship fund that was created for students who face financial difficulties in their second year and above. It really remembers her kind and generous nature. And I will talk about like student population, and this was sort of what I was talking about earlier, where the student numbers almost tripled, and you can see it's almost linear from the year 1946 to 1966. And also the student population now like resides between about an average of about 700, 600 students. And the composition of students is also really interesting. Over 66% of students come from a BAME background now, compared to like the normal sort of BAME population of 14% in the Northeast and 6.4% nationally. And even in 1953, students came all over the world to Sunderland. So like countries like Singapore, Kenya, India, Egypt, Hong Kong, and Denmark. And LGBT students are also like well represented in the cohort. and in international collaborations and research. But Professor Malcolm Hooper, who was a professor in medicinal chemistry, helped postdoctoral students undertake research in Tanzania, India, and Belgium. And our very own Dr. John Love, who is a lecturer in pharmaceutical science, went to Gulbarga and Kuvempu University in India for postdoctoral research as well. And this was funded by the British Council. And Professor John Lloyd was also a huge activist for research and really put like a lot of emphasis for research. And anyone who wasn't involved in research had to help facilitate research. And from 2008 and 2013, there was a 2+2 program as well, collaborating with Seki College in Malaysia. And basically, students spend 2 years in Malaysia and then the last 2 years in Sunderland. And members of staff reminisce that this was a really good relationship, that both students and lecturers really benefited, but it was stopped by the Malaysian Pharmaceutical Society. And I think the decision is sort of fundamentally regarded as a strange one, really. And now moving on to postgraduate education. Prescribing is sort of seen as a contentious subject, but interesting subject. And it used to be counter-prescribing led to like many disputes between the Cs and Ds and apothecaries, like how Emily mentioned. And although over-the-counter sales these days are a form of prescribing, they're made like really safer by the licensing process and the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or the MHRA. But in 2003 and 2006, supplementary prescribing and independent prescribing was introduced for pharmacists respectively, and Sunderland pretty much just offered them as soon as they were available. Clinical diplomas were likely provided before supplementary prescribing, but it wasn't clear like when. And the GPHC also announced that future qualified pharmacists will be prescribers in 2026, but this, I think the details are yet to be worked out. And the Overseas Pharmacists Assessment Program is to help non-EU pharmacists to become UK pharmacists. And this is like a convergent program. And we offered that since 2006, and it's just changed names to OSPUP in 2012. It's one of the 5 remaining providers and anecdotally the biggest in the UK, but I'm not too sure. This is the pre-registration pass rate for Sunderland Uni in recent years, which is really, really good. It's a bit scary for me personally because the pressure really is on to achieve, but I'm really sure that Sunderland has prepared me well. In 2012, there's a whopping 97% pass rate, which probably meant there's only one poor person that failed it, but it's still really good pass rate. And this is the most up-to-date head of school list. And as funny as it sounds, it's not anywhere, it wasn't an easy solution to help compile this list. It involved a lot of cross-referencing, and even then I wasn't really sure if Brian Hemsworth stopped working in 1999. But I think I'm trying to get this list like immortalized somewhere. I think because it's important for us to appreciate the leadership that these people brought to the school and sort of commemorate their contributions as well. And this slide is just to show like the many names that the University of Sunderland had. They used to be called the Technical College, and then it was the Polytechnic, and then under the Further and Higher Education Act of 1992, under the Conservative government, it was changed to University of Sunderland. And from the Galen building, we moved over to Science Complex in 2011, and this is the Science Complex. And I just wanted to say a few words about Dr. Paul Franklin, who passed away suddenly in last June 2020. It was really a shock to many students who, prior to lockdown, still listened to him in lectures. He was really a passionate lecturer in pharmacology and in the MPharm program in general and in the clinical diploma. program. He always like explain key concepts in an understandable way. Really a mark of a true expert in his field. But yeah, may he rest in peace. Thank you all for listening to me this evening. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to unmute yourself, type in the chat, or maybe even send me an email afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. That's excellent again. And there have been several comments saying what an excellent lecture it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I can ask a question, actually, to begin with, did you find it difficult to track this information down? Because it sounds to me as though you must have used an enormous diversity of research resources in order to find the information.
Yeah, so I think like I tried to use as many types of different sources as I can to really pull this together, because I couldn't really visit anywhere physically during the pandemic. So I pulled across from a really prominent report done by W. Nixon, and so that sort of helped me put that together. And I used Bryony's book on the UCL, so University College London School of Pharmacy, and lots of websites. Tried to scour the archives of Sunderland really, to help me find that heads of school list. But yeah, just pharmaceutical historian helps as well. But yeah, just try to pull as many different, online resources as I can really, because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there is a comment in the chat. Those of us who have been trying to carry on our pharmacy history research over the past year have obviously had to grapple with extremely restricted access to resources. So how have the speakers generally managed to cope with this? If I can throw that out to everybody. So Norma, likewise, and Emily, if you want to chip in, that's absolutely fine. How did you manage to cope?
I used mostly online sources, but before total lockdown, I was friendly with the staff at Wimbledon Museum, and they had access to computer and resources that I didn't have, and they kindly would look it up for me and send me the information, and I would credit them in my articles as being helping me.
Excellent.
And
Emily?
I had a similar situation where I contacted archivists at several different locations, and they were kind enough to help give me some information that I just couldn't find in sources that I could access right now. But unfortunately, yeah, some places I wasn't able to get and physically look at the sources I wanted. And so I'm sure there's much more to be said about Francis Bernard, but because this was a project of the pandemic, I think we'll have to wait to get some more research done later.
Yeah, thank you. Christian makes the comment that in Germany, resources were even more available, and an email request to archives and museums were responded to very quickly because the curators were alone in the institution and took care of the request almost instantaneously. For myself, I've got an enormous pile of print-offs of things that I need to consult, and as soon as the Wellcome Libraries open again, I should be first in the queue. Any more comments or points for discussion? Feel free to unmute yourself and contribute if that's the case. No? Okay. Well, in that case, I would like to thank each of our speakers for the time and effort invested in preparing and delivering their talks, and for the expertise which they so clearly have displayed to us this afternoon.